Hello, I am Jeremiah Taylor, a Utah real estate law and business law attorney in Utah. Today I will be answering the question, what are the reasons a landlord can evict a tenant in the state of Utah? Quick disclaimer, although I am a lawyer, this content should not be considered legal advice for your particular situation. Utah law sets forth 9 reasons a landlord can evict a tenant. These reasons apply to both commercial tenancies as well as residential tenancies. If a landlord wants to evict for a reason other than one of these, there is a good chance the landlord may not be able to evict. The first reason is for failure to pay rent. This is the most common reason to evict a tenant. The landlord, however, has to give the tenant 3 days to pay rent before the landlord may proceed with eviction. Sometimes tenants will go to court and plead with the judge for leniency, but if the tenant has not paid rent, there really is not a whole lot they can say that will persuade the judge. The second reason a landlord may evict applies when the lease automatically expires. At the beginning of the tenancy, the landlord might say something like, "You can rent this property for 1 year and then you have to move." There will be no automatic renewals. There will be no month-to-month tenancy. I am telling you now, the tenancy will just be over at the end of the year. In that situation, if the tenant does not move out by the end of the year, the landlord can evict the tenant. The third reason applies when the tenant is leasing the property on a month-to-month basis. In that situation, a landlord can give the tenant a notice that says you have until the end of the month to rent this property and then you have to move. Remember that for a month-to-month tenancy, that notice must be given at least 15 calendar days before the end of the month. So if the notice is given on August 17th, for example, that would not be 15 days before the end of August, so the tenant would have the right to rent the property until the end of September. If the tenant does not move out by the end of September, in that example, the landlord may evict. The fourth reason applies if the lease states that a tenant cannot sublease, but the tenant subleases anyway. In that situation, the landlord does not have to give the tenant an opportunity to retract the sublease. The landlord can just kick the tenant and the subtenant out. Depending on what the lease says, the landlord may also be entitled to money the tenant received by the sublease. The fifth reason applies if the tenant commits waste on the property. Waste is an old term that means simply property damage or failure to properly care for the property. The sixth reason applies if the tenant uses the property to carry on a business that is unlawful. This usually arises in a situation where zoning or HOA laws prohibit using residential properties to operate a business. If the tenant operates a business out of the property in violation of zoning or HOA laws, the landlord does not have to give the tenant an opportunity to cease business operations. The landlord can simply proceed with eviction if desired. The seventh reason is if a tenant is responsible for a nuisance on the property. Now this is usually meaning loud noises, bad smells, and other things that annoy people. The eighth reason arises if the tenant commits a criminal act on the property. Possession or use of drugs on the property or an act of violence are common examples of criminal acts. The ninth and final reason arises if the tenant fails to do something that the lease requires. For example, mowing the lawn, taking care of the landscaping. If the tenant violates a provision in the lease that is something different than one of the other 8 reasons I've explained, the landlord may often evict, but the landlord has to give the tenant an opportunity to comply with a specific requirement within 3 days before proceeding with eviction. You can read more about these 9 grounds for eviction at Utah Code Section 78B6-802. If you have any questions or would like some help with any landlord-tenant legal issue, I offer free 15-minute consultations. Please feel free to call me or email me through our website.